Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness, adapted from the novelization by J.R. Milward. Based on an original story by Murti Schofield. With J.R. Milward. With music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Episode 2.
I don't know how many alleys, apartments and industrial rooftops I negotiated in the dark and pouring rain. They all passed in a blur. My only real compass was the noise of sirens. I retreated from wherever they grew louder. I only stopped running when the adrenaline wore off and my body began cashing its oxygen debt. How I had allowed myself to get out of my usual shape, even considering my daily exercises, was inexcusable. My calves and sides were a tangle of lactic burns. I realised I had stopped and was leaning against a rooftop shed whilst tattered crows sulked nearby on some telegraph cables. My nose and eyes were streaming, and I was as soaked as though I had gone swimming in Lake Windermere with all my clothes on. I dug my hands into my pockets, finding a half-eaten chocolate bar purchased at the train station and a soggy scrap of white. I wolfed down the bar. Hey, I needed the sugar. And scrutinised the address on the card Werner had given me. Margot Carvier. Werner had said to go and see her. Would she help me now? It didn't take a genius to see I was a mess. Turning up on her doorstep in the middle of the night, drenched and fresh from the scene of a murder, would probably not endear me to her trust. But what other choice did I have? Sighing, I scanned the buildings around me. I was somewhere in the industrial quarter, far from the snapshot romantic image of Paris. However, Carvier's apartment wasn't about to come to me, so resolutely I set off again. It wasn't as though I could get any wetter. No sooner had I stepped onto the nearest fire escape than the roar of a helicopter's engines appeared out of nowhere. I glanced up and was instantly blinded by the searchlight sweeping the roofs. The helicopter's loudspeaker was garbled by the rain, but the commanding tone was unmistakable. A siren wailed only a few buildings away from my position. Instantly, my instincts took over. I relaxed my grip and slid down the 4 stories worth of slick, rain-soaked ladder in the time it took to count to 6. 2 years ago, I would have managed such a stunt with ease, and probably pulled off a handstand at the bottom for good measure. But a lot had changed in that time. I wasn't the gung-ho crusader trying for Superwoman of the Year anymore. Apart from some meditative maintenance work, I hadn't really pushed my body for a long time. A decent shock of adrenaline, however, will often achieve, at a pinch, the same results as months of hard training, if only for a short time. As I fell from the rooftop, a short time lasted just long enough. I stumbled, regaining my balance just as the searchlight zeroed in on my position. A cold wind from the downdraft blew a tornado of leaves and scraps of litter around my legs. Cursing, I realised I'd dropped into a courtyard ringed by houses and spiked iron railings too tall to vault over. There was no way out. The nearest block of flats had a boarded-up quality to them, but squatters had levered one of the doors off its hinges, presumably for easy access in an emergency. Well, if this circumstance didn't qualify, nothing would. Throwing the helicopter a defiant snarl, I ran at the door and managed to shoulder barge it 3/4 open. My damp shoes squeaked on the tiled lobby floor as I felt around in the semi-darkness and almost bumped into an old wardrobe partially blocking the stairwell. It took some manoeuvring, but I clambered past and pounded up the stairs. There was an old-fashioned cage lift, but with no power in the building, it was as useless to me as a bunch of daisies. While the helicopter was radioing in for ground support to occupy the building, I might be able to use the roof for another exit, assuming I could stay out of sight. Then I found out why this apartment block had been boarded up. 1 minute, I was jogging along. The next, I was hanging onto the shreds of fraying 60s-style carpet as the stairs beneath me creaked and collapsed. Dust clouds burned my throat as I coughed and spluttered. The whole building seemed, for one heart-stopping instant, to be on the verge of crushing down around my ears. Somehow, I had enough strength to haul myself over the lip of the hole, and realised, with ironic satisfaction, that the debris had knocked the wardrobe over. The battered old thing was pinned under piles of shattered bricks, joists and crumbling mortar, perfectly blocking the door. I could hear dogs barking on the other side, and rapid orders being yelled in French. One voice was demanding a ram to break down the door, while another was suggesting they try to find out who owned the building. I didn't stay to find out. The apartment block was almost totally dark, except for a few places where boards were missing from the higher story windows. Thunder rumbled, and rain poured through the damaged structure in torrents, slippery enough to make me lose my footing. There were plenty of boarded-up doorways, but I kept moving until I ran out of stairs to climb. I could hear a steady thud, thud from below. The gendarmes had brought their toys at last. The sound mirrored the thumping beneath my ribcage as I squinted through the murk and found the door to the concierge's room. Damp and age had done most of the work for me, but it seemed to take forever to prise away the planks covering the door. Sweat stung my eyes, and I left the bottom 2 planks in place as a crash from the lobby suggested that my friends had broken through. Fortunately, the door wasn't locked, and yielded to a few stout kicks just as shouting echoed up the stairwell. Hurriedly, I closed the door behind me and scanned the room. The shapes of ancient machinery lurked in the darkness like dinosaur bones. The only light came from a ventilation grating, accompanied by a blast of freezing rain, but it was enough for me to recognise and stumble over to the fire escape. A rusty length of chain held it fast, and my heart did a double somersault as the sound of the police drew closer. But the former concierge of the building had been a considerate soul, and had thoughtfully left a lump hammer in a corner by the machinery. 2 desperate whacks, and the chain snapped in 2. Unfortunately, the sound attracted even more frantic shouting. I could hear the pounding of the many heavily booted feet approaching at frightening speed, even as I burst through the exit and back into the teeth of the Paris thunderstorm. A flash of lightning struck the building next to mine, raising every hair on my body. But over the storm's violence, I could still hear the determined rumble of the police helicopter circling nearby. Damn, that was some gutsy flying. And I suddenly realised the truth. The police weren't chasing me because I was just a random, running woman. They were chasing me because they thought I was the monstrum. As if responding to my thoughts, the helicopter's searchlight snapped around and tracked across the roof. My shadow stretched and wove across the tar paper as I ran to the edge, desperately seeking a way down. And then I froze, caught in the full eclipse of the beam. For a terrifying moment, I saw the pilot and co-pilot looking directly at me through the rain-lashed windshield. If that didn't give them a good photo fit, nothing would. And that's when I also saw the opposite building and the drain pipe within easy reach. Well, I say easy. You can do it, girl! I gritted my teeth, squinted against the pouring rain, and took a running leap into the abyss. The helicopter roared as the pilot throttled up and attempted to relocate me with the searchlight. I heard it sail overhead, missing where I hung by the skin of my cuticles by a hair's breadth. And the cast-iron drain pipe groaned in protest and began leaning dangerously away from the wall. Rivets and fastenings sprang loose, one after the other, as I scrambled to slide down as fast as possible. I wasn't fast enough. Brick dust and rainwater filled my mouth as I let out a scream. I landed on something vaguely soft, and everything went black. It was the smells that kept me from blacking out, I think. As I lay there in the dark, getting my breath back and immediately regretting it, I realised I'd fallen into an open dumpster bin parked beside the building. The jolt of my landing had knocked the lid closed, hiding me from view. For a few minutes, that seemed to take forever, I waited, not stirring a muscle. At any moment, I expected to hear the tramping of feet and for the lid to fly off as armed police surrounded me on all sides. At one point, a horde of heavy footsteps and angry yelling passed the bin. I recognised the voice of the gendarme who had led the assault on the apartment building, and who sounded like he was getting ready to serve his men their own parboiled testicles for losing me so easily. The footsteps and bickering gradually faded into the distance, but I stayed where I was, hardly able to believe how narrow my escape had been. Easy, girl. Rest a minute. But I couldn't rest. After taking a quick peek to make sure I was alone, I rolled the lid back all the way so I could climb out. The breath I had been so carefully holding came out in a rush as I hugged the shadows, suddenly grateful for the rain that helped to wash the garbage stink from my clothes. If I was going to talk to Carvier, I'd best do it before she saw a news broadcast. With my luck, my picture would probably be all over the papers by the morning edition. Folding up my collar and tucking my hands into my pockets, I set off, trying to ignore the nagging doubts that were starting to whisper their way back into my mind. Werner's final words, and the unsettling blank where my memory should have been, bothered me most of all. It was like trying to walk through a door that had been bricked up, or cheat Winston at cards. None of my attempts to reconstruct the events after I'd lost my temper made the slightest difference, and a new fear began to surface. What if I had killed him? I could still feel the place where a gun had been pushed into my stomach. My eardrums were also aching, exactly as they had when I first fired a gun at close range without wearing defenders. My sabbatical from target practice had obviously been long enough for my ears to adjust to a less punishing schedule. I shivered. There was no way I could have simply killed him in cold blood. Was there? I'd been prepared to shoot him while in Egypt, even before he'd opened himself to Set. Had I been angry enough to do it now? The thought made me feel slightly queasy because the simple answer was yes. Ah, but it wasn't a gunshot that killed him, was it? A voice in my head showed me the image of Werner's body. Even if I had been furious enough to shoot him, I would never, could never have done that to him. My subconscious and I don't always agree. It took a moment for me to realise I was stroking the slight bulge of fabric above my breastbone. Salia's gift of the Tuareg cross had helped reassure my nerves several times in the last few months, especially when the nightmares kept me awake. I certainly felt in need of it now. Mademoiselle Carvier's apartment turned out to be in an even smarter neighbourhood than Von Croy's. I glanced at my watch. It was well after 10 p.m. I hoped I wouldn't be dragging her out of bed. My story and attire were hardly diplomatic enough for an afternoon tea at Wimbledon.
Who is it?
Mademoiselle Carvier, it's Lara Croft. I need your help. Concise and precise. That's me. I had a sense of déjà vu. The door lock clicking, the sodden footprints I left on the carpeted stairs. As I waited by Carvier's front door, I had to fight the urge to glance behind me, to make sure a killer wasn't going to slip by without me noticing. Had that happened for Werner? Miss Croft, I recognize you from photos and Werner's description. Mademoiselle Carvier, I really have to talk to you. It's important. The door opened a fraction. Ye gods! Carvier was the spitting image of my old schoolteacher, right down to the half-moon spectacles she now peered over, looking me up and down with faint disapproval. Her stout features could have been chipped from slate. You may come in. Merci. I shut the door behind me, grateful for the warmth of the fire crackling in her living room's grate. She didn't bustle as I had expected, but moved with a cool grace that was almost predatory. Obviously not a woman to fool or suffer them. She turned the radio off and fixed me with a frosty stare. My apprehension climbed a few more notches. Perhaps it was the way she wore her hair tightly in a bun, or the tweed jacket and the blue turtleneck, over which she now crossed her arms. Something about her touched me unexpectedly. She was the first living soul I had spoken to since Werner's death. An evil night to be out alone, Miss Croft. Our streets are not safe anymore. Mademoiselle Carvier, I have just come from Werner's apartment. And how is Werner? I'm afraid Werner is dead. Dead? Yes, and I don't have time to waste. I'm being chased all over Paris. Chased? I think you owe me an explanation, Miss Croft. I'm waiting. It's all a bit vague. I arrived at his apartment today from London. He was babbling with fear. He said he tried to contact you. He did. I never expected that. Not after Egypt. Werner has been fearful for his life. He accepted a commission 5 weeks ago. Since then, he's been acting strangely, jumping at shadows. Do you know why? Who is the commission from? The client's name... now, what was it? Eckhart. He wanted Werner to research something called the obscure paintings. I happen to be an expert on medieval histories, so Werner approached me at my department at the Louvre. Were you able to help him? A little, I think. Poor Werner was clearly terrified. Werner didn't scare easily. That's true. But he felt he was being stalked. With Paris as it is, the strain was getting to him. He even left a package with me for safekeeping in case anything happened to him. Do you know what it is? His field notebook, addressed to you. If he left his notebook, he really was spooked. You still haven't explained what happened. There was gunfire, but that's all I can recall. Gunfire? Werner was shot? Did you kill him? I can't remember. It's all a blur. Miss Croft, I strongly suggest that you talk to the police. Mademoiselle, I was a good friend of Werner's. I didn't kill him. I didn't. If you say so. Mademoiselle, time is pressing. Do you have the notebook? I do. It's safe for the moment. I really am going to need Werner's notebook, Mademoiselle. Somebody killed Werner. You say you don't remember clearly what happened? Perhaps the police are right in suspecting you. I didn't kill Werner. I think you better leave, Miss Croft. The notebook? Fine. I am not sure this is the right thing, but I must respect what Werner wanted. And now you'd better go. The police will be here any minute. What, police? I called them when you turned up on my doorstep. How could I be sure you were a friend? It was for insurance. You're all heart. For a moment, my subconscious tempted me to put my feet up on the couch, stretch out by the fire, and wait for the police to come. Mademoiselle Carvier kept a tidy home, with enough comfort to make my weary body long for a break. But then I saw the telltale flashing blue and red lights dancing through the window. Rest was not an option. Safety, shelter, and secrecy were now my priorities if I wanted to track Werner's killer. I would not find any of them here. Regretfully, I tore myself away from the light and the coziness, and found a window in the hall I could easily vault from. The cold hit me afresh as I splashed in a puddle. There was a police car nearby, but nobody in it. Evidently, the officers had already gone upstairs to question Carvier. I ghosted away, not really caring where I spent the night as long as I could be undisturbed. I wandered without much thought, keeping to those streets where the lighting was poor and the buildings unoccupied. Werner's notebook was a weight in my pocket, heavy with the hope it would hold some answers. It must have been hours later that I stumbled, exhausted, onto a disused tram deep in a boarded-up subway section. After making sure I was alone, I struggled to get comfortable on the cheap plastic seating, eventually settling for the floor instead. I might have wept, but there was no one around who could prove it.
In episode 2 of Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness, Lara Croft and Margot Carvier were played by J.R. Milward. Written and adapted by J.R. Milward. Based on an original story by Murti Schofield. With music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Additional sound effects courtesy of www.3sfx.co.uk and the BBC. Produced by Stephen Milward. Lara Croft and Tomb Raider are the property of Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix.